You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and...
Yo, Berean Talk family, what's up? It is your boy, your host, that guy, your man, Christian, coming at you with another installment to the Berean Talk show. Coming at you with another more of an impromptu episode because that's some things weighing very heavy on my conscience. And I wanted to share them with you all, share some thoughts and some observations. And hopefully you guys will have some decent feedback. Maybe it'll be bad and I can learn from it. Who knows? But number one, I want to say to everybody, happy 4th day of Black History Month. Happy Black History Month to everyone, whether you are on the chocolate side of the aisle, you're part of ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, such as myself. If you're on the vanilla side of the aisle, if you're brown, mocha, or anything else in between, if you are an American, happy Black History Month. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope that you are maybe doing some studying and research on what it means, finding out new things, uplifting brothers and sisters, all that great stuff. And shouts out to my trifling government for giving us the shortest month of the year. Appreciate that. But yeah, man, I came on here I want to ask y'all a question. And remember, I've said this before in the show, and I'll continue to say it just so you guys kind of understand, at least for this one, who I'm talking to. At least for this statement. 1 Corinthians 5:12, when Paul talks about, who am I to judge somebody outside of the ecclesia or the body or the church? And so today, this question I'm going to pose is for the church. And I just have a question. Why is it so quiet? Like, it's real quiet out here. And the reason I say that is because 4th of July, we all got something to say. Memorial Day, we all got something to say. Veterans Day, we all got something to say. Freaking, all the other holidays, even Holocaust Remembrance Day. Everybody has something to say, something to post. And mind you, the Holocaust didn't even happen here. Right? And so all of these different things, these holidays, and, remember this person and that person, and even with Columbus Day, who we know was a pretty raggedy person by his own volition and admission. Why is it so quiet? Why is it that all of the patriots are just what's happening? And I feel like I might know the answer, but I would love for someone to answer it for me. Maybe you can put in a comment somewhere and say, the reason we don't care, or the reason that I feel like a lot of people aren't saying is anything is ... But before I get further into the episode, I want to share something with you all. And this is going to be very instrumental to the rest of the episode. So growing up, my parents were very, very on purpose or purposefully taught my younger brother and I to look at and treat everyone the same, whether they are white, whether they are black, whether they are brown and everything else. You treat everybody the same. The reason being is because if you're a human being, you're created in God's image. And that you are fearfully and wonderfully made if God created you, correct? Okay, so we all got that. And so growing up, I knew that and I thoroughly believed that. But there were parts of my childhood that became trivial or even confusing when it became apparent to me that everybody else wasn't raising their kids like that, right? So for those of you all that know, I grew up in the homeschool community down here in North Carolina, Fayetteville specifically. And one of the things that I remember growing up, and it didn't matter where we were, whether it was a church, whether it was a co-op, whether it was some field trip event or whatever. As far as me and my brother went, and I'll speak for myself, my blackness was always addressed before anything else. We could have all been there for a evangelical conference or whatever, and my blackness has to be addressed at some point. My blackness is addressed when I go to some church that has majority Caucasian people in it or white people. My blackness is addressed before we have a political conversation. My blackness is, it's a very interesting trend to see that my blackness makes people uncomfortable. And why do I even say that? And so for those of you that know, from about 2016, where I was around 16 years old, I started following and considered myself a part of the grassroots movement known as ADOS, which is an acronym for American Descendants of Slavery, started by Miss Yvette Carnell and Mr. Antonio Moore. Shouts out to you all if you ever see this. And I remember, number one, just thinking that the grassroots organization was amazing because reparations for antebellum slavery and Jim Crow is at the heartbeat of the organization, being that is a form of biblical justice. And number two, ADOS is a lineage. It's just a people, regardless of where you are politically. That's just where you come from. If your people were here prior to 1964 and identified as Negro, 95% chance that they were descendants of slaves, unless they just happened to be that weird unicorn sect that lived free up in the Hamptons somewhere. And so I remember I went to this was the first time I ever experienced something like this. We were at a Sukkot, or for those of you all that don't know what Sukkot is, it's the Feast of Tabernacles, aka the most lit feast day / holiday of the year. Please go read about it in the scriptures. You won't be disappointed. But I digress. So we were at a Sukkot and I was wearing a shirt that had the American flag on it. And under it were the letters ADOS, ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery. And a young lady who was white saw my shirt and she asked, "Hey, what does ADOS mean?" And I told her, I said, it stands for American Descendant of Slavery. And she looked at me, and I kid you not, this is literally the face she made. Oh. And that wasn't the last time that had happened. As a matter of fact, just about any time I bring up my identity as ADOS to someone who is white or an immigrant or not ADOS, so even people that I've talked to that are of Spanish descent or Hispanic descent, there is always either this uncomfortability when they hear that, or there is this volatile response that, like, people just want to argue with me. Like, why do you want to live in the past? So, and again, being very specific, I'm talking about believers' responses. We're not talking about everybody else out there. We're talking about people that we break bread with, we fellowship with, read the scriptures with, pray with, cry with, confess our sins to one another. And when I talk about being an American descendant of slavery, all of a sudden there's silence or there's anger and frustration, which really could, I guess, three things: anger, frustration, or however you want to do that. And I always wondered, like, and I just want to ask you all, Why does my existence make you uncomfortable? I don't subscribe to the methodology of like outrage baiting, because that sounds like something that's very forward, very aggressive. But that's a real question, because anytime my identity or even blackness is addressed in majority non-ADOS spaces, there is this volatile or this really awkward silent response to blackness. And I want to know why. Why are believers feeling this way about something I have no control over? And the reason I mentioned all those holidays in the beginning is because Holocaust Remembrance Day, again, was the Wednesday before last when I'm filming this. It's February 4th. So Wednesday before last, January 27th, was the National Holocaust Remembrance Day, and really international, because I know people from other parts of the world that posted something for that day. And there is this international consensus from what I've seen that the Holocaust was a pretty messed up. I say that tongue in cheek. Obviously, it was one of the most horrific events that occurred in world history. If I told you that I was a descendant of a Holocaust survivor, which I am, but that's a whole nother conversation. But if I said that I was a descendant of a European Holocaust survivor, you all would say, wow, that's, oh my gosh, that's so amazing that they survived, and tell me more. What did your grandparents or great grandparents tell you? Yada, yada, yada. But as soon as I say something, all of a sudden I remember going to Shabbats, or not going to Shabbats, just observing Shabbat or the Sabbath, and having people over to our home, or more specifically my parents' home, because I don't own anything except my car. I remember we would have discussions during the Midrash, or the discussion of the Torah portion. And we would talk about a variety of things. But at some point during the conversation, we would get on the topic of anti-Semitism, and more specifically, the anti-Semitism that occurs over in the current land of Israel. And we would have a 2 to 3 hour conversation, literally, about a stabbing that might have happened, an attempted bombing or a successful bombing, or some missiles getting launched. Have literally a 2 to 3 hour conversation about it. And as soon as I said, yeah, that's pretty horrible. Also, there's this whole mass incarceration thing that's happening here in America that affects mostly black men and women, but statistically mostly black men. And now all of a sudden there's an argument. If I talk about, oh, hey, I saw this video of this cop literally cracking a black man's skull open for an unjustifiable reason, then all of a sudden there's an argument about it. Oh, what was he doing, or why exactly was that? Like, when I talk about slavery, there's always this, well, that happened so long ago, get over it. I do not know a person I don't know anybody that would say that to somebody that was Jewish. I don't think anybody watching this video, if you met a Jewish person and they talked about the horrors of the Holocaust and how it affected their family, you wouldn't say get over it. But you say it to us all the time. And I know why, partially. I partially know why that happens. And it happens because America never made it right. You never made it right. Number one, let's start with the slavery thing. I'm going to give a quick history lesson. Number one, everybody was told slavery ended in 1865. Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, who gave reparations to slave owners. And that you could look up. Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, ended slavery in 1865, and black people were cool ever since, up until like the 1960s, and then they got upset again because their feelings were getting hurt because we couldn't sit at a lunch counter. That's how American history is told in most sections of America. And I have had the privilege of being able to see how a lot of people, that was weird, people in America learn history, and who creates the textbooks, and who's the one that's writing the history. Of course, the victors write the history. And I understand that whether you were homeschooled, whether you were in a private Christian school or public school, you were severely, I'm not talking about you as an individual, I'm just saying just Americans in general are severely undereducated when it comes to political and race history in the United States. So let me give you a history lesson. 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation is actually brought into fruition. And June 19th, 1865, every slave is declared free. That's where we get Juneteenth from. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in April of 1865, so another president took over, which was his vice president. That's the first one. And then another president took over, and then another president. So you got 3 different presidents during this 12-year span known as Reconstruction, which was from 1865 to 1877. Technically is 1876. In 1876, there was a contested presidential election, much like the one that occurred back in 2016 between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And it was highly contested. It was relatively close, even though the Republican candidate, he actually didn't even win the popular vote, but he won the Electoral College. Okay, we got that, right? So what happened, right? And mind you, during Reconstruction, we did very well for ourselves as ADOS. We owned 14 to 15 million acres of land, being that most of the skilled labor that was in the South were Black people, because we were doing most of that manual labor. So if there was like iron bending to be done, if there's welding, if there was cotton picking, tobacco picking, all of these different things that we were being used for to create wealth for other people, now we're finally able to do it for ourselves. And we did pretty good. And we started to get reparations under General Sherman, or General Sherman's order of the 40 acres and a mule. We started to, and then that was rolled back. But then what happened in 1876? 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes, who was a part of the Free Soil Party, that then integrated into the Republican Party, becomes the president. And then there is a congressional meeting of sorts where Southern Democrats, right, because most of the South was run by Democrats, Democratic representatives in Congress and Republican representatives in Congress, along with the president, met up. And basically, I'm paraphrasing here, basically what happened is Southern Democrats and the Southern Territories, they were under what is called martial law, which means the federal troops were literally stationed down there, and they were basically the police. Why? Because they were down there to protect Black people and also help the South get reintegrated back into the United States, because they were a legitimate nation. The CSA, or the Confederate States of America, had their own Congress, they had their own president, they had their own currency, and they had their own military. They were a legitimate nation. So this congressional, what's now known as the Congressional Compromise, is Southern Democrats and Northern Republicans agreed they're going to pull out the federal troops in the South. They're either going to pull out the federal troops in the South, or you're going to have a Civil War Part 2. But who had to give the okay for that? Rutherford B. Hayes. And so they pulled him out. Now, mind you, a lot of these people, Southern whites, the ones that own slaves, you got to remember, these people were not just inconvenienced by slavery being abolished. You're talking about you ruined people's livelihoods, their ability to feed their families, their ability to pass down immense levels of generational wealth. And so the federal troops, or Big Brother, is pulled out of the South. And what do you think happened? For those of you that said that slavery was reintroduced, you are correct. There's a wonderful book And I say wonderful, I mean, it was very in-depth with the information, but it wasn't like a fun read. There's a great book that I would recommend you all read called Slavery by Another Name by Douglas A. Blackman. And in that book, it describes how antebellum-like slavery was reintroduced in the South post-Reconstruction. Why? Well, why not? If I'm not being watched by the federal government anymore, and nobody's really here to protect these Negroes, why not go get my property back? Because literally, slave owners were watching the men that they owned going into Congress and literally changing the political structure of their communities. So slavery started again. And you know when it got readdressed? And do you even know how I know this? And I want you all to do me a favor. I want you to just go on Google, type in Circular number 3591, Classification 50 of the 13th Amendment, or just Classification 50. That is a document found in the National Archives that has to rediscuss in 1941 involuntary servitude. Now, it is possible that you will be told that the reason that was there was because of the internment camps that were built on the West Coast for Japanese Americans due to the events occurring in World War II. And that's like this much of it. The main reason is because in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, North Carolina, and other southern territories, there were cases that were being reported to the Department of Justice and to the White House that, that whole slavery thing that y'all thought you got rid of. It's back. And, that whole, involuntary servitude, in the words of my mother, that's not really my zhuzh. My father wouldn't be proud of me using that word, but it is what it is. That's not, the whole slavery thing. That's not really my thing. We'd appreciate it if you came down and kind of sent some people to jail. You know what I'm saying? And that's literally what happened. The Secret Service was involved in many investigations in the South, and there were reports being brought back that it didn't even look like black people were free in certain areas of the South. It didn't even, this is before the Civil Rights Movement. Mind you, you're talking about 30 to 40 years before the Civil Rights Movement, we were dealing with slavery. 1941, just so you know, that's 80 years ago. I know people that I can text right now that were born before that happened. And America has yet to make it right. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, at the end, after the Civil Rights Bill was passed, mind you, the Civil Rights Bill had been passed. So according to mainstream American history, black people were happy. And that's not necessarily the case. As Martin Luther King said, the real justice would have been reparations. Because it costs nothing to integrate a lunch counter. It costs nothing for you to let me sit in the front of a bus. It costs nothing for you to integrate a pool. It costs you nothing to integrate a school. But it's going to cost you something to give biblical levels of restitution for what was done for over 300 years. At that time. Now we're at 401 and some change. And I want to give a special shout out to a very special brother and a mentor of mine, Mr. Rico Cortez, who, unbeknownst to him, actually started me on this journey of being very involved and very active when it comes to activism for the ADOS community here in America, obviously. And the reason that a lot of you have seen me with, some people have accused me of having rage or misplaced indignation. The reason I have it is because when I started studying with Rico, he told me that one of the subjects he wanted me to start studying in depth was righteousness and justice. And so he tasked me to go in the scriptures and look up how many times righteousness and justice is mentioned in the scriptures, and then look at God's heart on it. And I did. And after I counted like maybe 30 passages, I stopped counting because it was a ridiculous amount. And the point is, it's a very big deal. I'm not out here making videos about this stuff. I'm not out here speaking at protests and other events because I just want to be angry about something because I care so much about social justice and I just want to, fight the power. No. I read scripture about the people that are the most vulnerable economically and socially, those that are the poor and the widows and the orphans and the fatherless. And Yahweh tells us, do justice for them. And then when I look in America and see who are the poor, well, 50% of the ADOS community lives on or around the predetermined poverty level here in the United States. There is a link to an article all about the socioeconomic status of the ADOS community that I will put in the description of this video so you know I'm not lying. Okay, so that's the poor. So what? There's a lot of poor people. What about the fatherless? Oh, that's right. We have a 75% father absence rate in the black community. What about incarceration rates? Well, there are more black men locked up right now in the United States than there are women locked up in the entire world. Now, that might have changed since the last, I think that came from maybe somewhere between a 2015, 2017 study. I can put the link for that information as well in my description. Why am I saying all of this? I'm saying all of this because black people, and I get a lot of you all are frustrated with the social justice culture and everything else. We're not asking for sensitivity training. I just had to do some sensitivity training for my job recently. Arguably one of the dumbest things I've ever seen in my life. Top 20. Black people are not asking for sensitivity training. We're not asking for all of the cop shows on cable television to be removed. We're not asking for you to remove Aunt Jemima from syrup bottles. We're not asking you to put Black Lives Matter painted in the middle of Gillette Stadium. We're not asking you to post a black square on Instagram. All we asked you to do, this is all we're asking you to do. Please stop locking us up at astronomical rates. Please stop killing us and give us our stuff back. Reparations that's supposed to be paid out for ADOS is going to come out to about, a lot of people have different estimates, but I would say about $5 trillion. And for those of you that don't understand how much money that is, let me just break it down for you. The stimulus checks, the first round of stimulus checks that were given out in 2020 came out to about $3 trillion. So you're talking about the U.S. government in 2 weeks gave out reparations. By the way, I had to pay for that. And I didn't even get it. For those of you that have objections about paying for something that you had nothing to do with. And then, of course, the $600 that came out was probably like 1.5 trillion approximately. And then we have another few trillion that's about to come out under the Biden administration for the third round of stimulus checks. We just want justice. All this other cosmetic social justice BS that's been happening for the past year, we are not asking for that, and we don't want it. And quite frankly, just from my perspective, I don't care. I don't care. So, family, Berean Talk family, we need to talk about this. We seriously need to talk about this. Why is everybody else and everything under the sun getting dealt with except the people that built the richest nation in the world? And my final question for you is, just on a heart-to-heart level, why does my existence make you uncomfortable? Why? Pieces and blessings, family. I'm out.